music legend Ozzy Osbourne has died. Osbourne, as you know, pioneered heavy metal.
If there's one name that defines chaos, resilience, and pure rock and roll insanity, it's Ozzy Osbourne, a man who clawed his way out of the depths, not just of music, but of his own self-destruction. A life filled with tragedy, addiction, and near-death experiences, from a bullied schoolboy in Birmingham, ridiculed for his dyslexia, to the frontman of a band that birthed heavy metal, to a solo legend who defied all odds, Ozzy has lived a life few could survive. He's been exiled, broken, and left for dead. But he never stopped. How does someone stare death in the face and laugh? This is the story of a man who should have burned out long ago. This is the story of Ozzy Osbourne, the Prince of Darkness. John Michael Osbourne came into the world on December 3rd, 1948, in the industrial heart of Birmingham, England. Born into a cramped house in the working-class district of Aston, he was just one of 6 children in a family that struggled to make ends meet. His father toiled away in a factory, his mother worked long hours on an assembly line, and money was always tight. Arguments filled the house, tension was constant, and young John, who would later become Ozzy, felt like an outsider even in his own home. From the start, school was a nightmare. Reading was impossible. Numbers were a blur, and no one had the patience to understand why. Dyslexia wasn't something people recognized in the 1950s. It was just seen as stupidity. Teachers labeled him a failure, his parents lost hope, and classmates saw an easy target. The bullying was relentless. Every day, he was pushed, mocked, humiliated. 2 older boys took particular joy in tormenting him, cornering him after school, making him the punchline of their cruelty. No one helped. No one stopped it. It was just the way things were. At home, there was no comfort. His father, already hardened by the pressures of poverty, had no tolerance for weakness. When Ozzy cried out for help, he was met with a belt or a hard slap. Problems weren't discussed in his household. They were beaten out of you. The hopelessness grew, and by the time he was 14, it became unbearable. One afternoon, alone in his tiny bedroom, he grabbed a rope, tied a knot, and tried to hang himself. As his vision blurred, the door burst open. His father had caught him just in time. But instead of comfort, instead of asking why, instead of trying to understand, his father beat him for it. That was the lesson. Pain didn't get sympathy. It got punishment. After that, something inside Ozzy changed. He stopped caring, stopped trying. He knew school wasn't for him, so he quit at 15, walking away from a future that never seemed possible anyway. The world had written him off, and he had no direction, no qualifications, and no plan. His options were grim: hard labor or crime. He bounced between factory jobs, working with machines he didn't understand, painting houses, even gutting animals in a slaughterhouse. Nothing fit, nothing lasted. He was constantly fired for being careless, for making mistakes, for simply not giving a damn. With no steady income and no prospects, he turned to crime. It wasn't some grand scheme. It was desperation. He needed money, and stealing seemed like the fastest way to get it. But Ozzy was never a mastermind. He got caught almost immediately trying to rob a clothing store. With no money to pay the fine, he was sentenced to 6 weeks in prison. At just 17, he found himself locked in a cold, dark cell, surrounded by real criminals, men who had done far worse than shoplifting. That's when it hit him. If he kept going down this road, he'd end up dead or spending his life behind bars. But there was one thing that had always made him feel alive: music. From the first moment he heard the Beatles' "She Loves You," it was like a lightning bolt, straight to his soul. For the first time, he saw a way out. Not with his fists, not with crime, but with music. He didn't know how to play an instrument. He had no formal training, but he knew, deep in his bones, that this was his path. So when he got out of prison, he made a decision. He wasn't going to die as a nobody. He was going to become a singer. He had no idea how to start, no connections, no plan. But he had a fire inside him that nothing could put out. And that fire led him to something that would change his life forever. A tiny ad in a newspaper, looking for a vocalist for a rock band. It was a long shot, but Ozzy took it. And that one decision, that one phone call, set him on a path that would take him from the cold streets of Birmingham to the heights of rock and roll history. In 1968, a lanky kid with an unusual voice and a battered PA system walked into a dingy rehearsal room in Birmingham. His name was John Michael Osbourne, but everyone knew him as Ozzy. He had no formal training, no musical education, just a desperate need to prove himself. Inside that room, he met three other misfits. Tony Iommi, a guitarist who had lost 2 fingertips in an industrial accident but refused to quit. Geezer Butler, a bassist with a fascination for the occult. And Bill Ward, a powerhouse drummer. They weren't polished, they weren't refined, but they had something different, something dark, heavy, and raw. At first, they called themselves Earth, playing blues-influenced rock like every other band at the time. But one day, while practicing across from a cinema, they noticed a long line of people waiting to see a horror film, Black Sabbath, starring Boris Karloff. That's when it hit them. People were drawn to fear, to the unknown, to the sinister. What if music could tap into that same energy? They changed their name to Black Sabbath and started writing songs that felt more like ominous rituals than radio-friendly rock tunes. Their music wasn't about love and peace. It was about darkness, paranoia, and the feeling that something terrifying was lurking just out of sight. The turning point came in 1970 with the release of their self-titled debut album. The opening track, Black Sabbath, began with the sound of rain, a distant bell tolling, and then 3 of the most ominous, spine-chilling notes ever played on a guitar. When Ozzy's voice cut through with the words, "What is this that stands before me?" Logically, it was unlike anything the world had ever heard. It was slow, heavy, and almost suffocating in its intensity. Critics despised it, calling it crude, ugly, and even satanic. But the fans? They couldn't get enough. Just months later, they released Paranoid, and that was it. Heavy metal had been born. The title track, written in just 20 minutes as album filler, became one of the most iconic rock songs of all time. War Pigs was an explosive, anti-war anthem. Iron Man delivered one of the most legendary guitar riffs in history. And the entire album cemented Black Sabbath as pioneers of a sound no one had a name for yet. It was loud, menacing, and unapologetic. Music for the outcasts, the rebels, the ones who didn't fit in anywhere else. While critics continued to sneer, fans packed arenas. Black Sabbath was no longer just a band, they were a force. Album after album, they kept pushing boundaries. Master of Reality introduced sludgy, down-tuned guitars that would influence generations of metal bands. Volume 4 was a chaotic mix of brilliance and excess. Sabbath Bloody Sabbath proved they could evolve while keeping their signature heaviness. They weren't just surviving, they were dominating. But behind the scenes, Ozzy was slipping further into chaos. At first, The entire band indulged in the rock and roll lifestyle. Drugs, booze, and endless parties were just part of the job. But while the others could still function, Ozzy went all in. He drank from morning to night, snorted anything put in front of him, and spent most of his time in a hazy, unpredictable state. At first, it was wild fun. Then, it became a problem. Then, it became impossible to ignore. He started showing up late to rehearsals, if he showed up at all. When he did, he was either too wasted to perform or so erratic that recording sessions turned into disasters. He forgot lyrics on stage, his voice wavered, and tensions between him and Tony Iommi, once his closest ally, kept getting worse. The band was evolving musically, experimenting with new sounds, but Ozzy was stuck in his own world, lost in a cycle of self-destruction. By 1979, it was clear. Something had to change. The decision wasn't easy, but it was unavoidable. Tony, Geezer, and Bill sat Ozzy down and told him he was out, fired from the band he had helped create. For Ozzy, it was more than a career-ending moment. It felt like a death sentence. Black Sabbath had been his entire life, his salvation, the only thing that had ever made sense. And now, it was gone. Left alone with nothing but his addictions and regrets, Ozzy spiraled even further. He locked himself in a hotel room, drinking himself into oblivion, convinced that this was it. His story was over. But it wasn't. Because Ozzy Osbourne wasn't meant to fade away. And in the darkest moment of his life, a new chapter was about to begin, one that would turn him into something even greater. In 1979, the unthinkable happened. The band that he had helped build, the band that had given him purpose, the band that had taken him from the gutters of Birmingham to the heights of rock and roll, had turned its back on him. Black Sabbath had enough. Ozzy wasn't just unreliable, he was out of control. He showed up wasted, forgot lyrics, missed rehearsals, and when he was there, he was either too drunk to perform or too volatile to be around. Tony Iommi, once his closest friend, delivered the final blow. Ozzy was out. He didn't fight it. He didn't argue. In a way, he had seen it coming. But when the door closed behind him, the reality hit hard. He locked himself away in a Los Angeles hotel room, surrounded by nothing but bottles, pills, and the crushing weight of failure. Days turned into weeks. His only company was self-destruction. There was no plan, no future. He had spent his entire life proving people wrong. But now he believed them. Maybe he really was just a washed-up drunk. Maybe he really was finished. But fate had other plans. Enter Sharon Arden, the daughter of Black Sabbath's former manager, Don Arden. She had seen Ozzy's rise, and she had seen his fall. But more importantly, she saw something even he didn't. He wasn't done yet. Where others saw a lost cause, she saw potential. She refused to let him disappear into the abyss. At first, Ozzy didn't believe her. He didn't believe in anything anymore. But Sharon wasn't the kind of person who took no for an answer. She dragged him out of his hotel room, forced him to sober up, and told him, "You don't need Black Sabbath. You were the magic in that band. You can do this on your own." It was a wild idea. Ozzy had never written music without Sabbath. He wasn't a guitarist. He wasn't a composer. He was a frontman. But Sharon wasn't just trying to get him back on his feet. She was ready to rebuild him from the ground up. And the first step? Finding the right musicians. That's when he met Randy Rhoads. Randy was young, disciplined, and ridiculously talented. His guitar playing wasn't just good, it was electrifying. A mix of classical precision and blistering speed, He could take the chaos in Ozzy's head and turn it into something extraordinary. The first time Ozzy heard him play, he thought he was hallucinating. He had never heard anything like it before. And in that moment, something inside him woke up. For the first time in months, he felt alive again. Together, they started working on new music. And the result? Blizzard of Oz, released in 1980. This wasn't just an album, it was a statement, a declaration that Ozzy Osbourne wasn't just the guy who got kicked out of Black Sabbath. He was something bigger, something different. The album was a masterpiece. Crazy Train became an instant anthem, with Randy's unforgettable riff and Ozzy's haunting wails. Mr. Crowley was eerie, theatrical, and powerful. Track after track, it proved that Ozzy wasn't just surviving, he was thriving. Critics were stunned. No one had expected a man written off as a drunken mess to come back stronger than ever. But Ozzy and Randy weren't done. Just a year later, they released Diary of a Madman, pushing heavy metal to new heights. It was official. Ozzy Osbourne had been reborn, but his past hadn't disappeared. The demons were still there, lurking, waiting, and soon tragedy would strike, threatening to take it all away again. But for now, for the first time in a long time, Ozzy had something he thought he had lost forever: hope. Ozzy Osbourne wasn't just back, he was bigger than ever. Blizzard of Oz had been a triumph, but it was just the beginning. In 1981, he and Randy Rhoads delivered Diary of a Madman, an album that took everything they had built and pushed it further. The compositions were more intricate, the riffs sharper, the energy undeniable. Tracks like Over the Mountain and Flying High Again solidified Ozzy's place at the forefront of heavy metal. He wasn't just the guy from Black Sabbath anymore. He was his own legend. But with success came chaos. Ozzy was always unpredictable, but now he was something else entirely. He didn't just break the rules, he didn't acknowledge their existence. Every concert, every public appearance was a new level of madness. And then came the moment that would forever define his wild reputation. January 20th, 1982. Des Moines, Iowa. Thousands of fans packed into the auditorium, waiting for the Prince of Darkness to take the stage. Midway through the set, something unexpected happened. A fan threw what looked like a rubber bat onto the stage. Ozzy, always the showman, picked it up, held it above his head, and bit down. The moment his teeth sank in, he knew he had made a mistake. It wasn't rubber. It was real. The taste of blood filled his mouth as the crowd erupted into shock and awe. Security rushed him off stage, and he was immediately taken to a hospital for rabies shots, painful injections straight into his stomach. But instead of ruining his career, the stunt became legendary. Ozzy wasn't just a rock star, he was a myth, a creature of pure insanity. The world couldn't look away. But just 2 months later, that same world would come crashing down. March 19th, 1982. A tour stop in Leesburg, Florida. The band had been on the road for months, exhausted but ready to press on. The morning started like any other, until it didn't. The group had stopped at a property owned by their tour bus driver, Andrew Aycock. There was a small, single-engine plane nearby, and Aycock, who had once been a pilot, decided to take it for a spin. It was supposed to be harmless fun. A quick flyover. A moment of excitement before another long day of travel. Randy Rhoads, the young guitar prodigy who had given Ozzy a second chance, climbed aboard, along with makeup artist Rachel Youngblood. Ozzy and the rest of the band watched from the ground as the plane lifted into the sky. Aycock, showing off, began flying dangerously low over the tour bus, again and again. The third pass was different. A wing clipped the vehicle. The plane spun out of control, crashing into a house nearby. A fireball erupted on impact. Randy Rhoads was gone. He was only 25. Ozzy ran toward the wreckage, screaming, desperate, unable to believe what he was seeing. Just hours earlier, they had been laughing, planning for the future. Now, his best friend, his musical soulmate, was gone. The man who had saved his career, given him hope, and reminded him why he loved music, was nothing more than ashes in the flames. Ozzy was shattered. He locked himself in his room, drowning in grief, unable to function. He didn't want to eat, didn't want to speak, didn't want to exist. Losing Randy wasn't just losing a bandmate, it was losing the person who had held him together when everything else was falling apart. For weeks, he refused to go on, but Sharon refused to let him disappear. Through sheer force of will, she pulled him back, got him on his feet, and pushed him back onto the stage. It wasn't the same. It would never be the same. But Ozzy did what he had always done. He kept going. Through the pain, through the loss, through the endless cycle of self-destruction, he released more albums, played bigger shows, and built an even greater legacy. But no amount of success could stop the chaos inside him. By the late 80s, his addictions were worse than ever. The drinking, the drugs, the wild behavior, it was a constant downward spiral. Sharon had been his anchor, his savior, but even she had limits. And one night in 1989, he crossed a line that even she couldn't ignore. Blacked out from alcohol, barely conscious of reality, Ozzy turned to Sharon and whispered words that would haunt them both. "We've decided. You have to die." Before she could react, he lunged, wrapping his hands around her throat, strangling her. She struggled, gasping for air, her vision fading. And then, just in time, security burst in, dragging Ozzy away before he could finish what he had started. The police arrived, arresting him immediately. When he woke up in a jail cell, he had no memory of what he had done. No recollection of the moment he had nearly killed the one person who had saved his life over and over again. The court ordered him into rehab. It wasn't just about saving his career, it was about saving his life. For Ozzy, this wasn't just another rock star scandal. It was a breaking point. If he didn't change, he wouldn't survive. But even after all of this, the story wasn't over. Because Ozzy Osbourne wasn't done fighting yet. And the legend of the Prince of Darkness was far from finished. Being a rock star isn't just about the music. It's about the price you pay for it. And for Ozzy Osbourne, that price has been higher than most could ever endure. Fame came with fortune, but it also brought lawsuits, near-death experiences, and a body that's been battered beyond recognition. Yet somehow, through it all, he's still standing. In 1984, Ozzy found himself at the center of a firestorm. Suicide Solution, a track from his debut solo album, was meant to be a warning about the dangers of alcohol abuse. But when a 19-year-old named John Daniel McCollum tragically took his own life after reportedly listening to the song, his family blamed Ozzy. They took him to court, claiming the song contained subliminal messages encouraging suicide. The media latched onto the controversy, painting him as a dangerous influence, a corrupter of youth. But Ozzy fought back. He insisted there was never any hidden message, only a brutal truth about addiction. The case was eventually dismissed, but it left a permanent stain on his career. Legal battles were one thing, physical survival was another. Fast forward to 2003. Ozzy was no longer the reckless young madman of the 80s, but the chaos never truly left him. On a cold December day, he decided to take a quad bike for a ride around his estate. It should have been harmless fun. Instead, it nearly killed him. The vehicle flipped, slamming his body into the ground. His collarbone shattered. 8 ribs fractured. His cervical vertebrae were crushed. He stopped breathing twice. By the time paramedics arrived, he was barely clinging to life. Rushed into emergency surgery, he spent 8 days in a coma, hovering between life and death. When he woke up, his body was unrecognizable, weak, broken, and scarred. He had to learn how to walk again, to rebuild his strength from nothing. It was one of the closest calls of his life, but it wouldn't be the last. Years later, in 2019, disaster struck again. While recovering from surgery, Ozzy suffered a brutal fall in his home. Metal rods that had been implanted in his spine after the quad bike accident were dislodged, causing severe nerve damage. The pain was excruciating, the kind that doesn't fade. Once again, he was back in the hospital, fighting to regain control over his own body. Tours were canceled. His future in music was suddenly uncertain, but nothing could prepare him for what came next. That same year, doctors gave him the diagnosis that would change everything: Parkinson's disease, a slow, cruel disease that strips away movement, strength, and independence. For a man who had spent his life commanding the stage, throwing himself into performances, and feeding off the energy of the crowd, this was a nightmare. His hands shook. His legs gave out. The chronic pain never stopped. And yet, even as his body betrayed him, his spirit refused to break. He kept recording, kept creating, kept pushing forward. He didn't hide from the truth. He faced it head-on. In an emotional interview, he admitted, "It's been the most miserable time of my life. I don't feel like the same man anymore." But then, in classic Ozzy fashion, he laughed. "But I'm still here, and I'm not done yet." And that's the thing about Ozzy Osbourne. No matter how many times he's been knocked down, no matter how many doctors have warned him, no matter how many times the world has expected him to fade away, he refuses. Even as his health declines, even as the pain takes its toll, he won't go quietly. Because Ozzy Osbourne is more than a rock star, more than a survivor. He's the man who simply refuses to die. Ozzy Osbourne didn't just change music, he helped create an entire genre. Without Black Sabbath, there would be no heavy metal, no Metallica, no Iron Maiden, no Pantera. The sound that defined rebellion, darkness, and raw power started with 4 young musicians in Birmingham. And at the heart of it all was Ozzy. His voice, his presence, his sheer unpredictability turned Black Sabbath from a band into a movement. But what makes Ozzy truly unique is that he didn't just stop with Sabbath. His solo career redefined what it meant to be a heavy metal frontman. He wasn't just another musician, he became an icon, a symbol of chaos and survival. He took risks, broke rules, and set a new standard for what a rock star could be. Decades later, his influence still echoes through generations of artists who grew up idolizing him. And then, in the most unexpected twist of all, he became a household name in a way no one could have predicted. In the early 2000s, the Osbournes reality show transformed the Prince of Darkness into something entirely new: a father, a husband, and a source of pure, unfiltered comedy. Fans who once saw him as an untouchable rock god now saw him struggling to work the remote, arguing with his kids, and mumbling through everyday life. It was chaotic, it was hilarious, and it made Ozzy more famous than ever. He wasn't just the wild man who bit the head off a bat. He was a global phenomenon. Even after all the decades, all the highs and lows, the world still hadn't had enough of Ozzy Osbourne. And in 2024, the industry finally gave him the recognition he had earned over a lifetime of defying the odds. That year, Ozzy was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame for the second time, first for Black Sabbath, and now for his legendary solo career. The man who had once been written off as a drunken failure was now celebrated as one of the greatest to ever step on a stage. But even as the awards rolled in, even as he and Sharon continued their podcast, The Osbournes, where fans got an unfiltered look into their lives, one thing remained unfinished. There was still one last moment Ozzy needed before it was all over. And that moment was set for July 5th, 2025. For one final time, Ozzy Osbourne will take the stage with the original members of Black Sabbath, reuniting in Birmingham, the city where it all began. Back to the Beginning will be more than just a concert. It will be history, a farewell, a testament to everything Ozzy has fought for, everything he has survived, and everything he has given to the world of music. It won't just be Sabbath. The biggest names in metal, Metallica, Slayer, Pantera, will be there, all to pay tribute to the man who paved the way for them all. And in true Ozzy fashion, it won't be about money. Every penny will go to charity, Cure Parkinson's, Birmingham Children's Hospital, and Acorn Children's Hospice. Because even after all the insanity, all the destruction, and all the madness, Ozzy has always had a heart. He has been written off more times than anyone can count. He has survived addiction, near-death experiences, lawsuits, and a disease that is slowly taking his body away from him. But through it all, he's never lost his spirit. He's fought the industry, fought himself, fought the demons that tried to take him down. And now, as he steps onto the stage one last time, it won't be a goodbye. It will be a reminder. Ozzy Osbourne isn't just a musician. He isn't just a survivor. He is a legend, and legends never die. Ozzy Osbourne's story isn't just about music. It's about survival. It's about a man who has lived on the edge of destruction and somehow, time and time again, found a way back. He's battled addiction, faced death more times than anyone can count, been cast out of the band he helped build, and lost some of the people he loved most. And yet, he never stopped. From a bullied kid in Birmingham with no direction, to a pioneer of heavy metal, to a global icon, his life has been a roller coaster of chaos, genius, and resilience. He's been underestimated, dismissed, and told he wouldn't make it. But every time the world counted him out, he proved them wrong. He redefined heavy metal, reshaped rock and roll, and built a legacy that will outlive us all. And now, as he prepares for his final farewell, his impact is undeniable. Without Ozzy, there is no heavy metal as we know it. No Black Sabbath, no Crazy Train, no blueprint for the rebellious, untamed energy that fuels rock music today. His influence runs through every power chord, every head-banging anthem, every band that dared to be louder, darker, and bolder. But beyond the music, Ozzy's story is a testament to something even greater: the human spirit. The ability to rise after every fall, to fight when the world tells you you're finished, to live with no apologies, no regrets, and no fear. So, what do you think of Ozzy's incredible journey? his highs, his lows, his legacy. Drop your thoughts in the comments, and let's celebrate the legend together. And if you love stories of rock and roll's wildest icons, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more. Because if there's one thing Ozzy has proven, it's that true legends never fade. They echo through time. Their music never stops, and their spirit never dies.